I'm John McBain, the chairperson of Australians for Native Title and Reconciliation in Western Australia, ANTAR-WA. I'm also a member of ANTAR's National Campaigns and Advocacy Council. A great privilege I've had in life is to be initiated into Aboriginal law and culture in the Western Pilbara region of Western Australia, around Roban, Nalama and Injibandi country. What I want to talk about at the moment is the present parliamentary federal inquiry into the destruction of the 46,000-year-old caves at the Juukan Gorge in the Pilbara region of Western Australia. Before I do that, I have to say that is not my country. So I defer to the submissions by the PKK people and acknowledge that those people are in mourning for the loss of their country, which is in some senses like family to them. So there's obvious genetic connections that exist between some of the artefacts to people in the past and people living today. So our sympathy goes to those people, and naturally their submission as spokesperson for ANTAR-WA I fully support. The terms of reference of the inquiry, A, is the operation of the Aboriginal Heritage Act 1972 WA and approvals under the Act. The consultation, B, that Rio Tinto engaged in prior to the destruction of the caves with Indigenous peoples. C, the sequence and events that led to that shocking destruction. D, the loss or damage to the TOs or traditional owners from the destruction of the site. And I've already covered that as much as I'm going to directly. The heritage and preservation work that's being conducted at that site, the interaction of state Indigenous heritage regulations with Commonwealth laws, G, the effectiveness and adequacy of state and federal laws in relation to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultural heritage in each of the Australian jurisdictions. Now, this raises a couple of issues. That the first one is, look, the effectiveness of the laws in any state or Australia-wide. Well, we know how effective they are. They enabled that place to be destroyed, so they're ineffective. That they've been seriously found wanting. But it's far more complex than that. You see, I've got a cigarette lighter in my pocket, and it's made out of stuff from the fossil fuel industry, the plastic. It's made from steel, and inside it is gas. So the gas, you'll see the images as they're rolling. One of them or two of them are from Murujuga or the Burrup Peninsula. Now, that's where the gas comes ashore. That gas being brought on shore has in the past resulted in direct destruction of some of the amazing petroglyphs that exist at the Burrup, or as we call it, Murujuga. So we're all complicit, There's little bits of steel in my glasses here. So we're all consumers. We're helping provide the demand. But also, as Australians and West Australians, we have, in theory, in theory at least, the capacity to demand or help create better legislation, and we haven't, right? So in that sense, all of us have failed. We can't look at the WA state government and say they did it. We can't look at the federal legislation and say that did it. And I don't think we can even look at the CEO of Rio and say he caused it, or someone further down the chain, they caused it. Because as Kerry Packer said, you're entitled legally to push the law to the maximum extent, as long as you don't cross that line. If there wasn't a Section 18 approval and Rio went ahead and blew up that place, well, then they'd be breaking the law. Well, that's, definitely out of order. So it's the whole system that's out of order. But it goes deeper than that. When we're looking at legal systems and law, and even society, well, our present Australian societies are around about 200 years old. It varies from, state to state and federally, of course. 230 something, I think, federally, and less than that in Western Australia. Now, the original law system, or as we say, proper law, goes back tens of thousands of years. And under that law, so that's the ancient prevailing law, or still trying to prevail. The responsibility for caring for places, being custodians of places, like that place that was blown up, that lies fairly and squarely with the traditional owners of that country. For that responsibility to be usurped by federal and state legislation, I don't like the word racist, but it's if it's not racist, it's certainly ignorant. And let's look at the outcomes. The outcomes, that place was destroyed. So it adds weight to what I've just said. The system that we've put in place as part of modern Australia, modern Western society, has failed demonstrably. So it's easy to say something's failed. What do we do about it? So we're all involved in this. If we're all involved in this, we all need to play a role, even if it's through our elected representatives, or writing a letter to the paper, or sending a letter to your local Rio office, or another mining company, and let them know what you think, because this cannot continue. If a blackfellow went to the MCG or St George's Cathedral just down the road with a chainsaw or even a sledgehammer, they'd be arrested, right? And rightly so. This stuff is far older, far more unique, and of far greater national and international significance. So the system needs to improve. So how does that happen? Well, and when we think something has to change, well, then we start thinking about winning and losing. And that's not necessarily the case. I think we can have a situation out of this where everybody wins. So how can that happen? Well, firstly, in a broader picture sense, we've got an economy, the Australian economy, and Aboriginal culture as it survives still today. And we need them to come closer together so that the differences are less, the conflicts are less, the outcomes are more amenable to everybody. Now, what we saw with the destruction of the rock art, the cave system in the Juukan Gorge, was the response from the community was outrage in Australia. People are still talking about it. People who work in the mining industry, who have taken good salaries and thought their companies were ticking the right boxes, found out that they were ticking the boxes, but they weren't doing what everyone expected, protecting this stuff. And the real change within Rio, in terms of, and I don't necessarily agree with it, but the CEO and other people having to stand down, that came from a board level, and it came from an international board level because their institutional investors were saying, we can't invest in this stuff, you have to change. And the most obvious way of doing that is to sack somebody or a few people. But so this is a relatively new thing in Western economies. The idea that investors will be driving part of the social conscience of our society is a huge development. And if we project it forward 20 or 30 years, and looking at the consumption of Australian resources on international markets, I think it's pretty fair to say they are going to have higher standards than exist today. So a smart resources industry, a smart, lucky country, is going to start setting those higher standards today. So one of the issues with the whole heritage discussion is, what is the boundary of heritage? Is it just something that's classified as heritage under the Act? Or, so this place or that place? Or is it the storyline or songline that connects those two places? Or is it, as, I feel, in the Pilbara, we see all of our country as sacred. Right? Now, obviously, we can't say, well, everywhere that's got iron ore is sacred. You can't mine any of it. I think blackfellas should be able to say, at some point in the future, and we've got to start moving towards it now, these are the places where you can mine. And that is difficult because the ranges, the hills, it's maybe not mountains, they are of cultural importance. They're beings in Aboriginal culture, and unfortunately that's where the minerals are. So we may have to look at slightly higher cost production in order to meet the standards that the international investors are going to demand in the future. And if we can move towards a society like that, we are actually bringing two different societies or cultures together. I touched on what is heritage, and I think I explained that it's all of our country. The whole planet is sacred in international Indigenous cultures. So we have a very narrow definition of heritage, and it excludes things like, I've already touched on the whole country, but language, song, dance, law is part of heritage. But our heritage protection system actually discriminates against cultural law. So there's obviously scope to look at heritage in a much wider sense. And I think when we do so, we can move forward with issues like constitutional recognition, sovereignty, treaty, even republic. Right? We can address all of those issues at once. At the moment, we're not addressing any of them, and I think it's greatly dissatisfying a lot of Australians. The second issue is you'll see behind me on the screen some scrolling images. Most of them are of the Burrup Peninsula or Murujuga, which coexist with the industrial development on the northwest shelf, Woodside, etc. The other picture behind me is of a fish trap in another part of the country on a river system. And you can see, if you look closely, you can see the rocks sitting there and that formed like a little dam across the water that as the tide went out, it captured the fish who are going from what's going to become a closed lake, sort of, at low tide, out to the river, and then they come in again or they get stuck there. And the point of that is its relevance and potential. Firstly, in protecting cultural heritage, to protect that fish trap place, a camera looking straight down the outlet, so the opposite direction of the way that photo is, means it can be monitored securely. That's not taking into account the numerous satellites and things that are flying overhead, or a geostationary thing, a balloon or with a camera on it. There's so much technology out there. We've got them, protecting our footpaths and our driveways and all sorts of things. Surely we can use it to protect this country's ancient heritage. If it's good enough to protect a driveway or a footpath, surely it's good enough to protect this stuff. But it goes beyond that. See, the Juukan caves, I'm sorry if I got the pronunciation slightly wrong, but that place that was destroyed, it's now become known all around the world. Everybody in Australia has heard of it. So it's got obvious cultural tourism potential, right? But unfortunately, it's not there. Right? It got blown up. It had to get blown up to become known. Probably more Australians know the names of horses in the Melbourne Cup than of the registered Aboriginal sites, except for places like Uluru, maybe Murujuga. And, that is just really sad. And Aboriginal people, the ones I speak to, feel sad about that. But the potential to protect sites that are registered and make them, you can monitor them with live cameras. Oh, who's that bloke going there? What's he up to? How come he's got a portable saw with him, or whatever, or a can of spray paint? It's so simple to do. And one of the things about the resources industry is it's got some of the most amazing technology in the world. It can drive trains. It can monitor what's happening from satellites and all sorts of things. So it can do that protection. It's just a cultural decision to do so. And the alternative is not doing so. And, to close, one of our pops up north, it's a sad story. We were part of setting up Friends of Australian Rock Art, which was its main purpose was to try and protect the petroglyphs, the amazing petroglyphs at the Burrup or Murujuga. And one day Pop and Nan Linda came down to Perth and took us out for morning tea. And he said, I'm working for such and such a company as a cultural consultant. And he could tell we were shocked. And we were, because this was part of our evolving awareness of pragmatic reality, if you like. And he sensed that, obviously. He's not a fool by any means. And he said, I forget which one he used, have a choice. We can watch our culture get degraded and destroyed and get no benefit for our kids and grandkids, or we can participate and get some benefit for those kids and grandkids. And that's the choice that the present legislation gives to Aboriginal people. Thank you.